we've gone through now, and we got three different things to show. Okay, first we want to kind of list out abuses that happen every day in many parishes throughout the world.
Yeah.
And many people I don't think would see them as an abuse, but they are actually an abuse according to the documents of Vatican II, according to Redemptoris Sacramentum that came out under Pope John Paul II, according to the general instruction of the Roman Missal.
Yeah.
So there are abuses that are there that we maybe wouldn't think of, but they are there. So we're going to list them out so that you can help your parish correct those.
Yeah.
And then we're going to go through what a Novus Ordo parish can do today to bring their celebration in line with the great tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Aesthetically.
yeah. Take this as the beginning of a conversation. Let's put it that way. Take this as the beginning of a conversation, but also the beginning of getting specific about what you want from your bishop. Because it's not good to just sit there and curse the darkness and get mad, but you need to get petitions signed, send them to your bishops, and say, "Good bishop, here are abuses that are prevailing in the diocese." And you can cite the sources, and show them where the abuses are according to the official documents of the church. Please end these abuses in the diocese. And on the flip side, here are restorations of content that we are begging for.
So the third part, well, then we have a little list that we would see as a conversation starter for Catholics of what typical traditional Latin Mass folks would want to see repaired in the Novus Ordo.
Yeah.
Not even just, restored or repaired in the Novus Ordo. As perhaps a fourth addition to the Roman Missal. So we're in the third edition of the new Roman Missal. What prevents the church from having a fourth edition to the Roman Missal? And you don't need a council to do that.
No.
You don't need a council to do that. Because we saw that the Ordinariate received their whole Missal, divine worship, without a council.
Yeah.
Okay. So it doesn't take a council. It just takes specific petitions, people agreeing on those petitions, and taking them to their synod of bishops.
Yeah.
That's what it takes.
Yeah.
So that'd be the third part.
Then let's start. Let's go through some of these abuses.
So, if you assume versus populum in your diocese, if you assume that the priest has to be facing the people, that would be an abuse. You can't assume that. It is pervasive. It's the most popular thing to do. It is allowed by the bishops, and some bishops have now enforced it, but it is not assumed. What is actually assumed in the new missal, in the rubrics, is ad orientem, where the priest and the people are facing the same way toward Christ. Number two, if you celebrate a purely vernacular celebration, if your liturgy is only in English, if you're in an English-speaking country, if it's only in English, that would actually be a liturgical abuse.
Yeah.
According to our instructions here, you need to have Latin in your Novus Ordo somewhere. Somewhere.
And Pope Paul VI gave his suggestions of where to do that. Right.
And the instruction repeated it.
Yeah.
Number three, the strict use of new musical compositions would be an abuse. So if you're only just singing hymns throughout the whole thing, new modern hymns throughout the whole Mass, that would actually be a liturgical abuse. Sacrosanctum Concilium assumes that not only Gregorian chant would be continued, but also polyphony, and this is the ironic part, the chant that they assume will be most pervasive is actually plain chant. The singing that would be most pervasive is plain chant. It calls for, Vatican II called for simpler chants to be written so that the people can chant with the choir. Yeah. That's actually what they're calling for in Vatican II.
And actually, what's great about that is that I often wonder if what they were kind of doing was seeing what was going on in Anglicanism, because Anglicans were reviving a lot of plain chant in their morning and in their daily office.
Yeah,
and the people were very much accustomed to doing these even the classical tones, like the 8 classical tones and stuff that they were using for plain chant. Anglicans were doing it, and then in their liturgies, in the Book of Common Prayers liturgy, they had beautiful choral pieces, that were
Well, and that's
that
the
were
other
built
part.
on.
Well, that's
plain
I don't
chant.
want people to think that you can't have choral hymns in the Mass. We're going to do a separate episode on this, and we have to because choral hymns are an organic development
Yeah.
in the musical tradition of the Church.
Yeah.
And I think it was a good thing that Vatican II wanted to bring in choral hymnody. I think I see that as a good thing, and we'll get into why that is in another episode.
Yeah, but if you just have all modern compositions and that's it in the Mass, that's a liturgical abuse.
Number 4, the liberal use of lay Eucharistic ministers, especially for the sake of saving time. And this specifically comes from Redemptoris Sacramentum. There's a whole paragraph in there where it says you cannot be using Eucharistic ministers just for the sake of using Eucharistic ministers.
Yeah.
They are there for a purpose. And if that purpose isn't there, then they shouldn't be there either.
Right.
Okay, so this kind of, you go to a Mass and there's like 10 Eucharistic ministers.
And like 5 people.
Right. That's, and I always thought it odd to save time. I always felt, and this is personal, but I always felt one of the most beautiful parts of the Mass are when the faithful are receiving communion.
Yeah.
When you come back to your pew, you kneel down, and you just see the people of God flowing up, receiving the Lord, receiving the Lord, receiving the... I love watching that, and then praying, and then watching that, and praying and watching. So to want to end that sooner,
Yeah, like let's go.
that's a very, I don't know, I guess odd thing.
Yeah.
Number 5, the exclusion of an organ when an organ is readily available or affordable. Out of all the musical instruments in the world, the organ is the instrument for the Roman Rite, appropriate for the Roman Rite. And that came up through the 17 and 1800s. The popes have pronounced on this, that the organ is appropriate to the liturgy. Why? Because an organ mimics the angelic choruses.
Yeah,
right?
it mimics the human voice.
And it mimics the human voice.
Right.
So the Church has pronounced on this, that the organ is proper and appropriate to the liturgy. And if instruments are going to be used, it should be the organ given pride of place. So
Which also shows you, though, that there's an assumption of what type of music should be being played, because it's also recommending the instrument.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we've both been to plenty of parishes where that old organ is just sitting in the corner, or it's covered up with a leather cover,
Or just torn out.
or torn out. But even worse, it's sitting there and not being used.
Yeah.
I can understand if it's torn out and you can't afford a new organ; they're expensive, whatever. But if it's sitting there and you're not using it, that would be an abuse.
And drums would definitely, rock drums would definitely be an abuse.
I shouldn't have to say that. But number 6, making announcements on financial reports or giving pleas for funds in place of a sermon. That should never happen.
That's spelled out
Again,
actually in Redemptoris Sacrament. Yeah.
It is spelled out. And it, again, one of the good things from Vatican II and the new Missal was the promotion of the homily. You priests, get back to preaching to your people and preach on the Gospels, preach on the letters, preach on the Old Testament.
I'm glad you brought
reading.
that up, because that we didn't add that, but that should be also listed as an abuse, that the priest is actually duty bound to preach on the readings for the day. He actually needs to preach.
At least draw in something from the readings.
He needs to preach about the connection between the Old Testament and New Testament readings and the Gospel reading, because there are set themes there. Those readings were chosen for a purpose.
Yeah. So, and again, I think we both would agree that one of the bright spots of the new Missal is the expansion of the readings.
Oh, for sure.
You get longer readings, and you get the expansion of the lectionary, it's always a good thing to read more of Scripture. That's fine.
Right.
7, giving second homilies.
Yeah.
So having somebody else come up, or the priest, whatever.
This happens a lot. Priests go up, they preach, they just get it in there to get the preach for like 5 minutes, and they say, and now we'll have a guest come up and speak about the new Catholic initiative for this, that, or the other thing. And they come up and speak, and you're like, whoa. This is the homily,
Number 8, if you're standing during consecration, according to the general instruction of the Roman Missal, that would be an abuse.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to be standing during consecration. The priest is the only one who's there, and then he kneels. Number 9, this would be the last one. Liturgical dancing, especially in Western territories. And this is specific because it has been specifically said by the Church, in Western territories, this is not your culture to dance around the altar.
Right.
At all. And so there should be no liturgical dancing. Now, we most recently saw this in Father Flager's church here in Chicago, where you had leotard females dancing.
Like ballet.
Yeah.
Like full-on ballet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Dancing during the liturgy.
actually every liturgical abuse that's on here
And there is,
on full display.
that's true. No, that is true. But there is such thing as liturgical dancing. But I challenge you, the general you, not you, Steve.
Oh, okay.
I challenge
Thank
you
God.
to go look up liturgical dance, say in Ethiopia, in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, okay, or even the Ethiopian Catholic Church. There is such thing as liturgical dance, but it's not what you think. It's not derived from rock and roll dancing, or it's not derived from American interpretive dance.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
And actually what's great about it is that it's always in sync. It's not like every man for himself. Liturgical dance is always choreographed.
It's ordered.
Yeah,
like the
it's
heavens.
properly ordered and there's actually certain dances at certain times, certain feasts that like, okay, this is where we step this way, step that way. It's not our culture, but it is theirs, and yet it is still highly ordered and very much traditional. I mean, it goes
And still for the most part outside of the Mass of the Faithful.
Yeah.
So typically it begins outside the church and then enters in, and then things become settled.
Right.
So those are things that maybe those 9 things maybe people didn't see as abuses, but they would technically be abuses.
Yeah.
And so work in your parishes to correct those abuses.
And in your diocese, write to the bishop, petition him, and ask that these specific abuses would be dealt with.
Yeah, and just suppressed. They shouldn't be there. Okay, so on to ascetics that